Hey, so something I wanted to make sure that we cover is actually having a discussion about critical and reflective thinking. In the past, I've had students, and I should backtrack. Every single assignment in our course practically has the NACCE standard in it about critical and reflective thinking. And I feel like as much as I push students to think in this way, that oftentimes we haven't had a lot of experience about how to do that. And I wanted to just give you a little background information, expectations, what this looks like, and some guidelines kind of on how to begin thinking in this way. I do feel like the majority of our educational system has been structured in a way that we're kind of expected to be taught by the teacher, to be told what it is we need to know, be given the information we need in order to pass a test, kind of be set up and coached in such a way that we know how to get through with the right answers and say what the teacher wants to hear. And this is about breaking down all of those ideas. The reason for that being is how we've got research that shows how we make information concrete. And what that means is we can tell someone something all day long. You can memorize a fact or a figure or a number. But how this becomes concrete or usable information that's stored in our brains for the future is 10% of that comes out of training. So professional development, courses, online coursework. 20% more of that comes from observation, just seeing other people involved in a specific action, scenario. But 70% of what we make concrete in our brains comes from our own experience and how we make sense of that experience, meaning how we take information and perceive the things that are happening around us and how we end up making sense of that in our brain in the context of what we are doing in that moment in time. So, why do we even need to be talking about this? Well, the basic underlying premise, if you get nothing else out of this round of thinking about critical thinking, is that the main point is to uncover assumptions. We're going to talk a little bit more about what assumptions really are in a second, but by recognizing things that we believe or our assumptions about things, we are better able to assess if this assumption that we make is even justifiable. When we know the assumptions that we are making, when we can recognize things that other people believe, we can better inform how we see the world, and we can better understand the folks that we work with. And all of these things lead up to becoming a better leader of an early childhood program. Part of critical thinking, to me, and I struggle with this, I do not have an answer, is that I do know in my work, I work with directors of early childhood programs on a daily basis. And the more I see them and the more I work with them, the big component is something that isn't really taught in a textbook. And it's social emotional awareness. And that's social emotional awareness of yourself, as well as the folks around you, your staff, families, and people that you work with. But I've also come to believe that without the ability to think critically or recognize why we believe what we believe or why other people believe what they believe, I'm not sure if we can actually achieve social emotional awareness. So if you follow me here thinking about this, we could say that I am emotionally aware of what my staff are feeling at any given moment in time, but I could be making incorrect assumptions. So without that ability to think critically and say, why might this staff member feel this way? How is the staff member perceiving me today? Do they see me as a bully? Am I micromanaging? Am I being a leader? Am I being a friend? That's actually critical thinking. So I believe that critical thinking has to happen in order for us to ever become socially, emotionally aware. But the relationship there is reciprocal. I think the two have to exist hand in hand, but the two definitely have to exist in the role of leading any early childhood program. So if we backtrack for a second to assumptions, the one thing I want us to think about doing is identifying and checking our assumptions. And these are just beliefs. They're things that exist in your mind that you are typically going to not even be aware exist there. They're beliefs. They come from many different places. You've got culturally informed assumptions. You've got assumptions that are based on your past experience. I touched the stove burned me. I'm not going to touch it again. You're assuming that hot things are on the stove, you can get burned. Socially, we've got some assumptions that exist too. And I've given you some examples here just so this makes a little bit more sense. Culturally, so let's say a cultural assumption. Someone's raised in a family that has a strong female role model. The mom was, let's say, the breadwinner, head of the house, ran the bills, didn't really do a lot of cooking, cleaning. The dad stayed at home. They did most of those things, picking up the children, getting them to where they needed to go. What are the beliefs that are going to travel with that person over time as they grow up? Well, they're probably not necessarily going to believe that men should be valued as the head of the household. And that can look many different ways. But that would be an example of a cultural or social belief. And those two are kind of hand in hand. A good social one is that we all are familiar with this. The majority of the general public believes that childcare centers are babysitting children for parents to work. Well, we could argue that that's true. We do exist in early childhood or childcare centers for parents to be able to work. But what other parts of that are an assumption? And why is that assumption being made? You've got assumptions that you make based on your values. And we all have core values that drive the choices we make every single day. But let's say one of your values is being a neat freak. You are super clean. Well, you go into someone's house that's got piles everywhere. It's a little dusty. Doesn't look like it's been picked up in a while. You believe that they may take for granted their possessions in their home. They don't take pride in their surroundings. Is that necessarily true? No, but it's an assumption that you have based on a value. Experiential. This is another common one that we hear a lot, is that teachers tend to say children whose families are divorced, mother, father, whatever that scenario may be, living apart, that it's very hard for them to communicate with them about establishing a consistent routine or consistent practices. So after this happens for a while, every family that you've dealt with that's been through a divorce or is divorced, you cannot get consistency out of them to save your life. So you are believing that all divorced families lack consistency for their child's schedule. You're believing that based on compound experiences that have led up to you being able to say, every time this has happened, this is the outcome, so this is now my assumption. So before we talk about what this looks like in practice, why is it important to check in with assumptions? Well, we need to know what we're holding. This is baggage that we bring to the table every day. Not necessarily negative baggage, but nevertheless, we're carrying it with us. And it's going to filter all of our interactions. It'll filter the way that we say things, the decisions that we make, how we approach choices within the center we work. And we need to be able to identify others' assumptions. What are they bringing to the table to communicate with you? So let's look at this 4-step process to kind of take you through those steps. So if we think back, let's talk about the assumption of the divorced families. So 1, identify assumptions. We want to identify that in other people's work. If you're reading an article, what does the author assume? If you're looking at someone else's post on a discussion board, what are some things that another student assumes? What do I assume as the instructor based on something I've shared in my comment? Whatever it is that we're believing, identify what that is. It's going to be based on those things that we discussed, driven by a value, experience, cultural or social influences. And then check that. Is that assumption accurate? So thinking back to the situation of the divorce, is this valid? Is it safe to say every family who has been through a divorce lacks consistency for their children? Okay, why or why not? You can't just say, no, that's not true. And you can't just say, yes, it is true. Everyone I've met is that example to a T. Why or why not? And what evidence might exist to disprove the idea? Is there any evidence that exists to support it? Is there research that exists to support or disprove any of it? And then try looking at other perspectives. How would someone else perceive what you're thinking about? And what perceptions might this person have that affect that view? How would, in this case, the parent feel? How would the child feel? The child might feel torn back and forth. Mom does this, but dad does not do that. How does mom feel? Well, mom is probably, I'm making this up as we go. Mom's more strict. She's the rule maker. You go with her, you're going to do your homework. You're going to get ready for school the next day. TV for 30 minutes, the night's done. Well, you go to dad's, and because of not wanting to have any conflict, it's party time. He might want to take you out somewhere, do something fun, so you have that great idea of fun times with dad. How are these folks perceiving all of this? Do they even see the issue of consistency? What is driving their value choices? Well, the dad, if he wants to have a great relationship, that's the value that's driving his actions over having consistency in the schedule. So then we want to move on to reassessing this belief. After you've looked at some evidence, after you've thought about other perspectives, do you still believe the same thing? Has your thought changed? Has it shifted? And at this point, you can take an informed stance on the issue with new information. Your stance may not have changed. It may have changed. You may be so overly confused at this point, you say, wow, I just need to go back to the drawing board. But the point is here that you have identified assumptions and you are questioning all of these pieces that have come into play. I want to take this a step further and give you an example of how this looks in our course. We're going to have lots of opportunities to practice critical reflection and critical thinking. But let's just say, for an example, it's a discussion board. You've got a prompt. Think about that process we just talked through. Answer with your beliefs, and don't forget to talk about why or why not. Why do you believe it? Is there evidence there that supports why you believe what you believe? This is where you want to check yourself. Does everybody else experience it the same way? And as you're writing about it, be honest. Honesty, reflection, and evidence. Think back on experiences you've had. Think about what evidence exists to support it, what evidence is against it. Ask questions of other students. Think about how to get to the root of the problem or idea. As you're going, rethink your beliefs. Has anything changed? What caused them to change or stay the same? And as we're going along, be prepared for questions that might challenge you. What is an example of this when it's not true? Would this be the perspective of someone else? What's an experience you've had that supports this or totally negates this? I try to be as highly active in the discussion boards as I can, because when these are done in the right way, this is one of the best opportunities for critical thinking and growth in a group setting when they are done the right way. So do that of each other. Something I want to clarify is that what critical thinking is not. It is not criticizing. So the goal of critical thinking is not to come in here and shred someone's ideas to pieces. It's really continuing to ask why until you get to the root of what we're talking about. The reflective piece of this means thinking about how your own experiences shape some of these beliefs. And that critical thinking isn't just making something up, thinking outside the box. It's random, it's creativity. It's really just a thought process. It's very logical, It's quite structured. You can use research to discuss why you think something is true or not. Experience, things that have happened in your life socially or culturally that affect it. But it's not this made up, highly creative process. And it's also not saying what you think I want to hear, because that will not happen. I am a firm believer that there's really not a huge right or wrong way to do a lot of things. It's more about the process, and it's more about, we'll see over here in this other column in a second, just developing something a little bit further. What this will take of us together is respect. Not everybody could just drop a job. Hey, you need to leave that center. They're not treating you well. This is a very tricky field to work in. And no, the work environments are not always set up to be conducive to all the things that we need as adults. But with that being said, be respectful of your classmates and don't bash their practices and don't put them down for their beliefs. There's no judgment here. And it's not that anyone, like I said, would have a wrong idea. It's just underdeveloped maybe. It does take practice, thought, intentionality. We have to trust each other. You have to be able to reflect on your past, your culture, your beliefs, why you believe the way that you believe. And how is this going to happen in our coursework? Well, you'll see that this is, like I said, on almost every rubric of every assignment that we have. But it's because this is truly something that you have to be able to do to be effective, to be able to lead people in an early childhood program, and to ever have any sense of social emotional awareness, which is one of the biggest components of leading other people. Different ways that this will happen in the course. I ask us to apply things more often than not. So you may get some content information. You may get links to where rules and regulations are, but I am not one that you will rarely see me saying, what does rule point 0204 say? It will be more about, how would you use this in your center? Why is this important information? I want you to have the information, but you need to know how to apply it in your life. Lots of open-ended activities, meaning I'm not huge on being formally structured. I don't have to have things looking a certain way. Like I said, I want this to be more about the process for you than a product. We will look at some case studies. Some of them will be very detailed and some will be very vague. But I do that because I want us to be able to really think about assumptions and get into some deep conversations with each other, which happens many times through discussion boards. There will be a couple of opportunities for peer review once we have built some trust with each other and get to know each other a little more. And my feedback. I put keep it real down there because I ask a lot of questions in my feedback, and they are not meant for you to write the answers and respond to me. They're meant to engage your brain into thinking about what other information could I have shared to either make this clearer or to think about other perspectives, things that you could have said to clarify a little bit better for the reader, your beliefs. So my feedback is very real. It's very to the point, but it is full of questions, and they're meant to keep you thinking. I wanted to give you all kind of an overview of what it means to think critically. And there is more to it. It's much deeper than this. But for right now, this is where we will start. We're going to have a discussion board this week. Will be the first one. It's got a very short little scenario with some questions. And I want you all to look back over this if you need to think critically about how to answer the questions. What are your assumptions? What are the assumptions that the people are acting under? And how do we navigate that? So just look at it as fun. It's engaging brain work that's going to better prepare you to work with others in the field of early childhood. And I'm excited to get started on this with you. And I know that we've got a lot to learn from each other. So let's get started.